You're listening to Heroes and Villains with Bruce Leslie.
I wanna live in a world full of heroes, not sit here counting zeros in a cubicle downtown. I wanna look out my window, see them flying, and swing across the horizon as I cheer them on so proud.
And welcome to another episode of Heroes and Villains, the podcast that talks all about characters from comic books and related media, and dares to ask, how much do you really know? This week, I'm doing another character that's like just a little selfish here. I'm doing one for me, another old-time character that I've really liked for a long time, in the same vein as the recent Zorro episode. This week, I'm talking about Tarzan. Tarzan, also known as John Clayton II, Viscount of Greystoke, sometimes referred to as Lord Greystoke, and sometimes erroneously referred to as the Earl of Greystoke. He was created by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and his first appearance was Tarzan of the Apes, a story that ran in as a serialized story in the All Story magazine, starting in October 2012. Now, my personal experience with Tarzan, I can say that I like Tarzan, and that's a big part of that. It's because I like a lot of old characters, and I like the pulp feeling, but there's something about Tarzan that, even though it is a pulp character, it seems a little more classic than that even. It seems to transcend pulp just a little bit, maybe because it's not so much noir. But why? Why do I like these old characters? Why do I like all these old characters? I mean, I am old, but I'm not pre-World War I old. I'm not that old. But they just have some kind of appeal to me. And I watched a lot of Saturday and Sunday morning programming, specifically programming on like TBS and WGN when I was growing up. A lot of black and white movies, a lot of old black and white TV shows. And, of course, the Weissmuller, the Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movies were a part of that. But I think even more so, like Sunday afternoon programming or something, was the Tarzan television show that starred Ron Ely, or Ellie. I always pronounced it Eli, but I might be pronouncing it wrong. I do that from time to time. So that Ron Ellie show, or Eli show, was a big part of that. But honestly, it had to be Filmation. You know, I've looked into it. What does Tarzan have in common with Zorro? What does Tarzan have in common with Lone Ranger? Really, the one thread that ties them all together is Filmation cartoons. And I think for some reason, at the right formative years, Filmation really must have made a big impression on me, because there was a show called the Zorro/Lone Ranger/Tarzan show. It was a combo cartoon block on CBS on Saturday mornings from 1980 to 1982. And I'll be honest, I'd say it's a pretty safe bet that I was glued to the television on Saturday mornings during those years. And then, in addition to that, I did spend 3 months in the jungle, so that's got to count for something. I was in Madagascar in the jungle for about 3 months, so maybe some Tarzan love grows out of that in some abstract way. The physical appearance, what does Tarzan look like? Well, he's an adult human male, European descent, specifically English. He's described as tall, athletic, usually more lean and not as bulky. He's also described as handsome and tanned. He has gray eyes and long black hair. Typically, he wears almost no clothes except for a loincloth. And it's stated that his preferred dress is a knife and a loincloth of animal hide. Now, what about the powers with Tarzan? And this is interesting because there's really a whole lot more to talk about in terms of powers with Tarzan than I initially would have thought. I mean, he's not necessarily got superpowers, though he kind of does. And I guess that'll be the last one that I have here on my list of powers. But he's mainly not supernatural for the most part, if there is such a thing as being not supernatural for the most part and not the all part. But his jungle upbringing gives him abilities far beyond those of ordinary humans. He's courageous, intelligent, loyal, and steadfast. As an example of his intelligence, he taught himself how to read. Tarzan can learn a new language in just days. He can ultimately speak many languages. That includes the language of the great apes that we're going to talk about a little bit later. He can also speak French, Finnish, English, Dutch, German, Swahili, many Bantu dialects, Arabic, ancient Greek, ancient Latin, Mayan, the languages of the Ant-Men, and of Pellucidar. So he's a polyglot. Also, his strength, speed, stamina, agility, reflexes, they're all extraordinary in comparison to normal men. And also his swimming skills are phenomenal. And his swimming skills are something that always made an impact on me, because I can remember that 1979, 1980, those early cartoons, watching those. There was at least one episode, but I think it happened more than once, but it shows Tarzan just being a mighty swimmer, swimming against the current in this river that's going towards a waterfall or whatever, and he's just, doing his freestyle swimming. And swimmers have often been cast in the role of Tarzan at least twice. And one thing I used to do when I was little, like 5 years old or something, I would go to the swimming pool and I'd be in the kiddie pool, and I couldn't swim, but I would bend at the waist so that like my torso, my upper body was parallel with the surface of the water, and I would try to mimic the way Tarzan looked when he was swimming in the raging African rivers in those cartoon shows. So his swimming skills definitely made an impact on me, who has always actually been a really poor swimmer, but I like to pretend I could swim as well as Tarzan can. As far as his strength and speed and stamina and agility and reflexes, he's wrestled full-grown bull apes, full-grown gorillas, lions, rhinos, crocodiles, pythons, sharks, tigers, even dinosaurs have wrestled with Tarzan, and he's yet to lose. Very acrobatic, climbing, clinging, leaping. He can do all those things as well as any great ape can. And his distinct mode of travel, his way of moving from place to place, he likes to use branches. He swings from vines to travel at great speed. He's a skilled tracker, and he uses his exceptional hearing and keen sense of smell to follow prey as well as to avoid predators that are tracking him. And he can communicate with many species of jungle animals. And it's not like Aquaman-style telepathic communication. It's more like Dr. Dolittle, where he has learned to speak their language. He's also been shown to be a skilled impressionist, for whatever that's worth. And he can mimic the sound of a gunshot perfectly, apparently. And then the last power, and we'll understand the root behind this power when we talk about the character biography, but the last power is the only sort of supernatural power, and that is immortality. And I don't mean in the way that Tarzan will always live on in the hearts and minds of his fans. In the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels, Tarzan did achieve immortality. So we'll talk about that in the character biography, which, perfect segue, because now is the character biography. So Tarzan is the son of a British lord and lady. And this British lord and lady were selling to Africa in order to address issues of Belgians in the Congo that were infringing on British concerns in the area. And I think the concerns revolve around rubber trees, like maybe the Belgians in the Congo were trying to steal rubber trees that belong to British subjects or something like that. Anyway, there's a reason, and the reason's not too important, but there's a reason that this British lord and lady were selling to Africa. Now, sometime around 1888 or early 1889, Tarzan's father, Lord Greystoke, and his very pregnant wife were marooned on the Atlantic coast of Africa by mutineers. Kind of important to point out that word, marooned. I like to just make a note that Tarzan's parents weren't shipwrecked. The ship didn't wreck. There was a mutiny on the ship, and they kicked Lord and Lady Greystoke off the ship. According to Burroughs' first Tarzan book, Tarzan of the Apes, after the crew mutinied, Lord Greystoke and Lady Alice, who was pregnant, were deposited on the African coast with supplies and guns to help them survive for as long as 5 to 8 years. Now, the child who would become Tarzan, the young Greystoke Jr., was born soon after they were marooned. and his mother detached from the reality of their situation. She just kind of maybe went into sort of a postpartum depression kind of situation. She really became dissociated from her child, her husband, her surroundings. His father built a cabin that he heavily reinforced to keep out attacking animals. But when Tarzan was a year old, his mother died. I don't know that the cause of death has ever been made expressly clear, at least not in the original texts. But when Tarzan's mother died, his father became kind of a defeated man in his own right and just became really inattentive. And in despair, he accidentally left the cabin latch open. So when that happened, an animal by the name of Kerchak, who was the violent, or at least sometimes violent, leader of the anthropoid ape tribe, the Mahoney, that we're going to talk about a little bit more. But the leader of the tribe, a guy named, an ape named Kerchak, he entered the cabin and he killed Tarzan's father, Lord Greystoke. So pretty soon after his parents' death, being an infant more or less on his own, Tarzan became a feral child. And the tribe of apes called the Mahoney, boy, that's a tricky one for me to pronounce if I try too quickly, but a tribe of apes known as the Mahoney, who are great apes of a species unknown to science, they sort of took him in. Now, the Mahoney are worthy of some discussion of their own, because they're described by Burroughs as being approximately man-sized. They appear to be a species intermediate between chimpanzees and gorillas. So they're bigger than chimpanzees, not quite as big as gorillas. I picture the Mahoney as being sort of like the apes in Planet of the Apes style apes. Let's see. Edgar Rice Burroughs also described them as man-like apes, which the natives of the Gobi speak of in whispers, but which no white man ever had seen before Tarzan. And this was to imply a connection to the Yeti, or the abominable snowman. The Tarzan comics published by Malibu Comics in the early 1990s, those suggested that the Mahoney were a variety of Sasquatch, or Bigfoot. Also, some people who, you'll be surprised, a lot of people dedicate a lot of time into trying to analyze exactly what these totally fictional apes are. But there are some people that suggest they might be a variety of Australopithecus. So if you're much of a biological anthropologist, you may be familiar with the term Australopithecus. Gorillas are called Bolgani by the Mahoney, and they're explicitly stated to be a separate species. So Edgar Rice Burroughs went to great pains to say that Tarzan was not raised by gorillas, but rather the Mahoney, a different type of ape. It has also been suggested that the Mahoney could be retroactively identified with a recently discovered species of ape called the Billy Ape, I think, B-I-L-I ape, the Billy Ape, the Billy Ape. I don't know how you'd pronounce that. I'm going to say Billy Ape. But it's a type of giant chimpanzee that shares some of the traits of the fictional Mahoney, including the size of the ape, as well as its habitat. And this species, the Billy Ape, was only identified by primatologists as recently as 1996. And I say identified by primatologists because, yes, I'm sure that folks who shared, geographical habitat with these giant chimpanzees, these Billy Apes, were aware of them way before the scientists who gave them a name were familiar with it. But, I'm limited to what the primatologists know, and they didn't know about this particular Billy Ape until 1996. Now, as described by Burroughs, the Mahoney are organized in tribal bands ruled by dominant males or kings, which subsist by foraging for fruit, grubs, insects, and sometimes meat in localized territories. Now, Tarzan, of course, is raised in the tribe of Kerchak. That's the tribe that follows that ape that killed his father, and they are based out of the coastal jungle of equatorial Africa. And Kala is the name of the ape that becomes Tarzan's ape mother. And here's her story. Kala had an infant, she had a baby of her own, and that infant actually died the very morning that Kerchak killed Tarzan's father. So Kala was in mourning and was missing her own ape child. She was actually still carrying the body of the deceased ape child. And when she saw Tarzan crying all by himself, she dropped her dead infant into Tarzan's crib, and she picked Tarzan up and took him as her own. Now, Tarzan actually fits in with the tribe quite well, and a little bit of a spoiler here. When Tarzan becomes an adult, he actually becomes leader of this specific tribe of apes. So that makes him Lord Greystoke and Lord of the Mahoney apes that he hangs out with. Tarzan is his ape name. According to Burroughs and his Edgar Rice Burroughs and his guide to the Mahoney ape language, Tarzan, tar means white, I believe, zan means skin. So in this fictional language, Tarzan actually means white skin. So you got that little nugget of trivia if you want it. Now, his English name, of course, as I said before, is John Clayton II, named after his father, John Clayton, and he's the Viscount of Greystoke. Though, because I think a lot of people, specifically maybe audiences in America, don't know exactly what a Viscount is. I mean, I don't know what a Viscount is. It sounds like a discount with a V to me. Maybe I'm not even saying that right. Maybe it's Viscount or something. Anyway, a lot of American folks who are the primary audience for Tarzan, at least in the beginning, probably didn't know their peerage as well as they should have. So changing it to Earl really makes it easy because we all know Dukes and Earls, thanks to that famous song, The Duke of Earl. Anyway, it's also important to know that Edgar Rice Burroughs uses a narrator to sort of tell this story in first person. And his narrator in Tarzan of the Apes describes both Clayton and Greystoke as fictitious names that implies that within the world that Tarzan lives in, he has some other name that's his real name. And this narrator is using these fictitious names to keep from, I don't know, bringing disgrace to the peerage or something like that. Tarzan was literate in English before he encountered other English-speaking people. He could read English. And his literacy, his ability to read is self-taught because after several years in his early teens, he would go visit the log cabin that his dad had built, you know, when he was just an infant, where his father had gotten killed. He would still go back and visit that cabin. And inside that cabin, there were all kinds of books, including children's primer books and picture books to sort of teach the basics of, you know, A, B, C, D. And then he works his way up so that he eventually reads every single book in his father's portable book collection that was in that cabin. And he's fully aware of world geography, basic world history, and he is aware of his own family tree. Like, that's not a revelation to him when he finds out about it. I mean, he's always known about his family tree, that he's the Viscount of Greystoke. Now, when he's 18 years old, he meets an American woman. And this American woman is named Jane Porter. Of course, this is the Jane of Tarzan and Jane. You know, I don't think I gave proper appreciation to the fact that Jane was American. Like, for some reason, I always thought she was English in the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels, but she's very, very clearly American. That's just like my own creation in my mind that Jane was English, but she's American. Jane, her father, and some other people in their party are also marooned on the same coastal jungle area where Tarzan's parents were marooned 20 years earlier. So my takeaway lesson from the original Tarzan novel is don't go sailing if you're not prepared to be marooned and raised by apes, which I'm all for, so I'm cool with sailing. But Jane returns to the United States after she meets Tarzan. But Tarzan actually leaves the jungle to search for Jane, who he has decided is his one true love. Now, in the novel, The Return of Tarzan, Tarzan and Jane actually get married. The description of their relationship is that Tarzan is deeply in love with his wife, totally devoted to Jane. In numerous situations, other women express their attraction to him, but Tarzan politely but firmly declines their attentions. Now, in some of the later books, Tarzan actually goes to live in England with Jane for a time. And I think this is why I thought Jane was from England, or maybe from one of the movies that we're going to talk about later. But he goes to England and tries living in England with Jane. They have a son named Jack, but his son actually takes an ape name also. And his son takes the ape name Korak, which means the killer in the Mangani language. Tarzan doesn't like England very much. In fact, the term that's used is contemptuous. He has contempt for what he sees as the hypocrisy of civilization, the fact that people don't earn their position in society, they're born into it, which isn't something that happens in the jungle realm where Tarzan grew up. So Tarzan and Jane return to Africa, and they make their home on this extensive estate that becomes a base for Tarzan's later adventures. In the novel Tarzan's Quest, Tarzan comes into conflict with the Kavaroo. And the Kavaroo are a hostile tribe that's terrorizing the jungle and stealing women. They kidnap Jane, and, Tarzan, of course, goes to rescue Jane. And during this adventure in this novel, it turns out we discover, the reader, as well as Tarzan and Jane discover, that the Kavaroo are immortal because they've developed a pill that they take that grants them eternal youth, a fountain of youth in the form of a pill. So Tarzan, Jane, and Tarzan's monkey friend Nakima, they all get a hold of some of those pills from the Kavaroo, and they take the Kavaroo pills. Man, these words are not the easiest for me. I apologize. But they do take these immortality pills, and from that point forward, from Tarzan's quest forward, Tarzan, Jane, and the monkey friend Nakima, they no longer age. They become eternally youthful. They become immortal. In terms of Tarzan's characteristics, emotionally, he's described as courageous, intelligent, loyal, and steadfast. He's presented in most of the novels. In fact, I would say all of the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels, he's presented as behaving ethically in most situations, except he does get motivated for vengeance by grief, because when his ape mother, Kala, is killed, he does seek out revenge for that. Typically, when he's presented with a situation where a weaker individual or party is being preyed upon by a stronger foe, Tarzan takes up for the little guy. I mean, that's what makes him a hero, right? That's pretty straightforward, stereotypical, heroic stuff. When he's dealing with other men, Tarzan is firm and forceful. With his male friends, he is reserved, but he's also loyal and has been shown to be generous. When people visit his African estate, he is depicted as being generous and gracious. And of course, as a leader of his ape tribe, as well as a leader of men at times, he commands devoted loyalty from his followers. And then one of the last little nuggets, and this is actually from one of the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels, so it's the strongest canon out there. But there is a story where Tarzan visited Hollywood, California. And Tarzan goes to visit Hollywood. He finds out there's a movie being made about his legend, because Tarzan is someone who is known throughout the world. He's not some secret in Africa in the later novels. So there's a movie being made about his legend. Tarzan goes to audition for the role of Tarzan. Like, Tarzan himself auditions to play Tarzan, and the casting director says he's not the right type, which is kind of funny. I get a little chuckle from that. And of course, it was Edgar Rice Burroughs making a commentary on the very popular Tarzan movies, casting lead actors that he thinks are a little too beefy and not lean enough to actually be the Tarzan he envisioned in his mind. And Tarzan's trip to Hollywood, I think, is the perfect segue to the next section here. And this is a long section, but I got to apologize ahead of time. I indulge myself in this section because I like the multimedia that relates to Tarzan. And in the very beginning, Tarzan movies were made pretty quickly after the first novel was written. The first Tarzan films were 8 silent movies and serials that were released between 1918 and 1929. Most of them were based on novels in the original series. The very first Tarzan feature was called Tarzan of the Apes, made in 1918. Of course, a silent movie starring a guy named Elmo Lincoln. So Elmo Lincoln was our first on-screen Tarzan. He was also in a movie called The Romance of Tarzan in 1918. In 1920, we got The Revenge of Tarzan, starring a guy named Gene Poller. Tarzan the Mighty in 1928, starring Frank Merrill. And Tarzan and the Golden Lion in 1927 featured the then unknown Boris Karloff as a villain in that movie. Now, other actors did portray the character in the 1920s because there were a lot of Tarzan movies being made between the 1918 and World War II. Some other people that played Tarzan in the 20s were P. Dempsey Tabler, James Pierce. James Pierce is significant because he actually married the daughter of Edgar Rice Burroughs. The first Tarzan movie with sound was called Tarzan the Tiger, which is a confusing name if you ask me. It came out in 1929, featured Frank Merrill as Tarzan. It was shot as a silent movie initially, but then it was like dubbed in post for release. So it was shot as a silent movie, kind of turned into a talkie in the post. It was Frank Merrill's second time as Tarzan, but they say it cost him the role because apparently his voice just didn't seem like the voice of Tarzan. So I'm picking like a really strong Midwestern, kind of northern Midwestern thing like from the movie Fargo. I'm thinking we have a serious Minnesota accent and nobody's buying that an English noble who grew up in Africa speaks with that Minnesota accent. That's what I'm going to say. Now, the most popular series of Tarzan films began with a remake of Tarzan the Ape Man in 1932. And the reason that these are so popular, at least a reason that these are so popular, is because we've got a new Tarzan, someone who's going to become iconic as Tarzan, synonymous with Tarzan, and that's Johnny Weissmuller. So Johnny Weissmuller starts playing Tarzan in Tarzan the Ape Man 1932, along with Maureen O'Sullivan as Jane. And Johnny Weissmuller, you heard me talking about swimming. Well, Johnny Weissmuller was a 5-time Olympic gold medalist in swimming. And he starred as Tarzan in a grand total of 12 films. In contrast to the way Tarzan spoke in the novels, you heard me describing his abilities and his biography. He was a really intelligent character in the novels. But when Johnny Weissmuller was playing Tarzan on screen, he started to speak in sort of a pidgin English. And that's where the dialogue comes from, where we have that iconic misquote, "Me Tarzan, you Jane." And Johnny Weissmuller kind of speaks in that simple broken English that's referred to as a pidgin in some of my sources. That's not real consistent with the eloquent Tarzan of the novels. But it is Johnny Weissmuller that probably gave a lot of people their definitive Tarzan, and that definitive Tarzan for a lot of people says, "Me Tarzan, you Jane." But once again, that's a misquote. That line was never actually spoken in any of Johnny Weissmuller's films, so just keep that in mind. In 1933, we had sort of a dueling Tarzan situation because Johnny Weissmuller was making movies in the 30s, but then there was sort of a rival production called Tarzan the Fearless, made in 1933. Tarzan the Fearless had Buster Crabbe as Tarzan. And I don't know if you checked out my Flash Gordon episode, because I'm pretty sure I've done a Flash Gordon episode. Man, that'd be embarrassing if I'm convinced I did and didn't. But, Buster Crabbe, pretty famous for Flash Gordon, being Flash Gordon in the serials. But Buster Crabbe was also Tarzan in Tarzan the Fearless, and Buster Crabbe also a former swimmer. I don't know if he won as many Olympic gold medals as Weissmuller did, but Buster Crabbe was a very successful swimmer before going to Hollywood. The New Adventures of Tarzan in 1935 kind of went back to the novel's version of Tarzan and gave us an intelligent Englishman. This was actually released as a serial, The New Adventures of Tarzan, rather than a single feature film, and that starred Herman Brix as Tarzan. But you got to remember, Buster Crabbe is playing Tarzan, Herman Brix is playing Tarzan. While this is going on, we've still got like the main series of Tarzan movies starring Johnny Weissmuller. It's not really a passing of the torch. These are all sort of dueling productions. And of course, like I said, The New Adventures of Tarzan in 1935 was a serial, so it wasn't considered to be, I guess, at the time in direct competition with the Weissmuller films the way that the Buster Crabbe movie was. Tarzan's Revenge was released in 1938. It starred Glenn Morris as Tarzan, and Glenn Morris, not a swimmer, but a gold medal winner in the Olympic decathlon in 1936. Was that the Berlin Olympics? Man, what a, oh boy. Anyway, we've got multiple people playing Tarzan at the same time. I mean, I would be shocked if we had 2 Tarzan movies in 2 years these days. And to think that you've got 4 different people playing Tarzan on the big screen at the same time, that's just kind of crazy to me. Let's see, after Tarzan and the Mermaids in 1948, that was Johnny Weissmuller's final film as Tarzan. And, he sort of was getting old. He'd been doing this for 15 years. 15 years of swinging from a vine with your shirt off. Maybe he decided he was a little too old for that part. But he didn't entirely leave Tarzan, because he moved on from Tarzan to appear in a series of movies starring as Jungle Jim, who, Jungle Jim, jungle explorer, not that different from Tarzan, but he does get to wear a shirt. Lex Barker portrayed Tarzan in 5 films between 1949 and 1953. Unlike all these athletes that we had, we had a decathlon guy, we had a swimmer, we had Buster Crabs a swimmer, Johnny Weissmuller's a swimmer. We had all these guys who were really athletic in terms of actually accomplished athletes who were going on to play Tarzan. Well, they did something crazy. They actually cast someone who was an actor first to play Tarzan from 1949 to 1953. Lex Barker was not an Olympic athlete. He was a rich guy from New York who decided to go into the movies. Then after that, there were 6 films starring a guy named Gordon Scott from 1955 to 1960. Gordon Scott was a bodybuilder. He was a bodybuilder who was working as a lifeguard at a hotel in Las Vegas when somebody saw that guy and said, "Put this man in the pictures. He's our Tarzan there." There was a remake. This would be the 3rd version, the 3rd movie version of Tarzan the Ape Man in 1959, starring Denny Miller, that did not do well at all. Jack Mahoney is a veteran stuntman that played the part of Tarzan in 2 movies in 1962 and 1963. Mike Henry is the name of a former NFL football player, pro football player. Mike Henry played Tarzan from 1966 to 1968. Tarzan in the Valley of Gold in 1966 was a movie starring Mike Henry as Tarzan. Here's what's weird to me. So the Mike Henry Tarzan movies, specifically Tarzan in the Valley of Gold, this movie was made when James Bond had suddenly become a very popular fictional character. So they had Tarzan basically being James Bond. So instead of Tarzan with the animal skin swinging from a vine, they had Tarzan in a tailored suit on a jet flying around the world on dangerous missions. They basically turned Tarzan into a secret agent in 1966. How's that? Let me know what you think of that. I'm telling you, to me, that's just crazy to have Agent 00 Tarzan on the case. The movies kind of fizzled out a little bit after their attempt of turning Tarzan into James Bond. For some reason, that didn't do as well as they'd like. So we had about 13 years, I guess, without a high-profile Tarzan movie. In 1981, MGM releases its 3rd version of Tarzan the Ape Man, this time starring relative newcomer Miles O'Keefe as Tarzan. But the person they put on the movie poster was Jane. And Jane was played by Bo Derek. Bo Derek's husband, what was his first name? Like John Derek or something. Anyway, Bo Derek's husband directed the movie. Jane, I think, was the star of this movie, even though it was called Tarzan the Ape Man. This was a rated R movie. Now, I still have not seen the 1981 MGM movie. But I can definitely say when I was a kid, I was not allowed to watch this 1981 MGM movie because not only was it rated R, but the movie poster with Bo Derek swinging on a vine, wearing very little more than a smile, meant that my folks were not going to let me watch that movie. Now, I guess I could always watch it now, but by all accounts, I didn't miss a whole lot. But, there was this big renaissance in old-time characters. 1976, we had I think it was 76, we had this high-profile King Kong movie with Jeff Bridges in it. We've got Zorro the Gay Blade in the early 80s. We've got this Tarzan movie in 1981. There was a poorly received Lone Ranger movie made around this time too. So a lot of these characters that I became so interested in all had theatrical studio movie releases that for the most part I didn't get to see. And by the time I was old enough to get to see them, the reviews weren't so great, so I didn't see them. It's just this weird disappointment of really wishing I could see these things for, like, I'll say at least 13, 14 years, that when I'm old enough to see them, just hearing that it's not worth my time. Maybe I will go back and watch this Bo Derek Tarzan movie and just hope my wife doesn't get mad at me for watching it. I don't know. Now, a movie I did get to see, which was not rated R, came out in 1984. And this is Greystoke, The Legend of Tarzan, Lord of the Apes. This one really made a big impact on me because this is the first time that I actually realized Tarzan was English and that Tarzan was nobility and that he was part of the peerage. Like all the Johnny Weissmuller movies and black and white stuff that I would watch on TV, I never caught on to the connection that this was an Englishman. I just imagined that he formed spontaneously in the jungle for some reason. I never really got into the origin story. I just liked the action. Well, Greystoke, The Legend of Tarzan, starring Christopher Lambert, the Highlander himself, as Tarzan. Not a great movie, to be honest. Not a great movie, but man, so impactful because I watched that so many times over at my cousin's house on HBO and stuff like that. And it became the definitive Star Wars, listen to me, the definitive Tarzan movie of my youth. And I still can kind of picture the movie poster and some of the key scenes from Greystoke. It was a very impactful Tarzan movie for me. Once we go past Greystoke, we get a lot of movies that either I didn't know about or I just wasn't interested in. Like there was a 1998 movie called Tarzan and the Lost City, starring Casper Van Dien as Tarzan. 1998, I wasn't going to the movies a whole lot. And also, I did go see Starship Troopers, so I was familiar with Casper Van Dien, but until I was, putting this section together for the podcast, I didn't know there was a movie called Tarzan and the Lost City from 1998, but there was. Now, the next one that I can't believe I didn't see, and I don't know if this movie was just absolutely terrible and was only in the theaters for like the blink of an eye, if maybe they knew they had a stinker and didn't really promote it. I don't know how a movie from 2016 with a pretty high-profile cast, how I didn't go see that. Because I like Tarzan. So, I'm so intrigued with this character of Tarzan. And The Legend of Tarzan, a 2016 movie that I have some kind of amnesia. I was going to the movies like every week in 2016, it seemed like. This was after we were already doing Hero Movie Podcast, so I'm surprised I didn't argue to cover this show on Hero Movie Podcast, but for whatever reason, I totally missed The Legend of Tarzan, the 2016 movie that starred Alexander Skarsgård. I mean, Alexander Skarsgård, maybe not the most famous of the Skarsgård family, but still, it's a name you recognize. Margot Robbie played Jane. I had no idea Margot Robbie had played Jane. Samuel L. Jackson is in this movie. Christoph Waltz is in this movie. Digimon Hansu is in this movie. Or maybe you pronounce it Jamon Hansu. Maybe the D is silent. Anyway, why did I not go see this movie? I have no idea. Now, I know why I'm not watching it now. It's got some negative reviews. They say that pacing is a problem, and that really makes it hard for me to want to tackle watching a movie at home if it drags at any point, because it's just too easy to get distracted. Now, in the theater, I can handle a movie that drags no problem. At home, it's a little bit tougher. So I missed The Legend of Tarzan in the theaters. Maybe I'll get around to watching it if I can find it for free. I don't know if I'm going to pay to watch this, but Alexander Skarsgård is Tarzan. Margot Robbie is Jane. Samuel Jackson is in it. I've got to have to at least watch a little bit of this movie eventually. Now, you notice I skipped over the animation, so we're going to get to that now. 1999, Disney released their animated version of Tarzan. And just from the trailer alone, as a Tarzan fan, a fan of the Filmation movies, a fan of Greystoke, I said movies, but the Filmation show, a fan of the movie Greystoke, a fan of Johnny Weissmuller, I did not want to see this this cutesy looking Tarzan thing. And I'm sorry, it might be a great movie, and I'm not trying to yuck anybody's yum. You know, if you enjoy Tarzan, the Disney animated movie, it makes me happy to know you enjoyed it. In 1999, I had no motivation to see this movie. I still haven't seen this movie. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. It just, Tarzan needs to have a little more edge, in my opinion, than Disney would be comfortable with. It did have 2 sequels, which is kind of weird because the first sequel to 1999's Tarzan was a direct-to-video movie called Tarzan and Jane that came out in 2002. I think that makes sense. You start with Tarzan, you follow it up with Tarzan and Jane. The third movie is called Tarzan 2 in 2005. There's a little bit of a particular nature that I have, where sometimes weird naming conventions are simultaneously hilarious and infuriating. When you call the third movie Tarzan 2, it's one of those situations where it's kind of hilarious and kind of infuriating at the same time. But in 2005, Disney released the direct-to-video Tarzan 2. Now, also in 1999, we had dueling Tarzans again. Remember I said back with Johnny Weissmuller, he was dueling, going head-to-head with movie releases against Buster Crabbe, both of them playing Tarzan. Well, in 1999, Disney released Tarzan to the movie theaters, and Sony produced a younger, sort of something aimed at smaller children, I guess, younger children than Disney's Tarzan, so I guess toddlers are who they're aiming it at. I don't know. But there was a direct-to-video movie called Tarzan of the Apes that was animated, released by Sony. I think they were hoping to get confused parents and grandmas and aunts and uncles going to Blockbuster in 1999 to rent the animated movie Tarzan for their kids and accidentally picking up Tarzan of the Apes. That's all I can figure. I don't know that anybody actively would seek that one out. It's not just movies. There's also a Broadway production, multiple Broadway productions based on Tarzan. The first one was in 1921. How about that? All the way back in 1921, there's a Broadway production of Tarzan of the Apes that starred Ronald Adair as Tarzan, Ethel Dwyer as Jane. There was another musical called Tarzan the Musical. It was in 1999. It was actually, it wasn't in 1999. I apologize. Tarzan the Musical was a stage adaptation of the 1999 animated feature. So it was one of the Disney going to Broadway sort of things. And it premiered in 2006. And as a theater parent, I've seen my son in many Disney to Broadway to local theater productions. You know, he's been in Frozen Junior, the stage play, a couple of times. He was cast in the 101 Dalmatians before the local problems or the recent problems came up and they sort of canceled all rehearsals and productions. But anyway, I'm very familiar with Disney movies, Little Mermaid. I'm familiar with all those becoming stage productions, and Tarzan was no exception to that. Tarzan also was a radio program. The Lone Ranger was a radio program. Tarzan was a radio program. Tarzan had at least 2 popular radio programs. The first one started on September 12th, 1932, with James Pierce in the role of Tarzan. And then the second Tarzan radio program started in November 1951 with Lamont Johnson playing Tarzan. There was a live-action Tarzan show on television from 1966 to 1968. This show actually is one that I watched a lot. This had Ron Ellie. I don't know how you pronounce his last name, but he played Tarzan in this TV show. Jane was not a character on this show, but this is the show that introduced Cheetah. I think a lot of folks at home listening right now know what I mean when I say Cheetah. Tarzan had a friend named Cheetah who was a chimpanzee, and you'd think with a name like Cheetah, it would be a cheetah. Who names a chimpanzee Cheetah? I don't know, but I like it. I like the character Cheetah. Cheetah comes from this TV show. Also, Tarzan had a child sidekick, a little boy named Jai, Jai. Another reason I remember this show so well is about the time I was watching this show in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, 3rd, 4th grade. my best friend was a guy named Jai. So he always would point out, hey, I've got the same name as this kid from the Tarzan show, because nobody else had that name at the time. I mean, now you'll see that name a little bit more often. Jai Courtney is an actor I can think of, but growing up, I only knew two Jais, my friend and the little kid from Tarzan. And I do believe my friend was probably named after the kid from Tarzan, as far as I know. There was that animated series from Filmation that I told you I was a big fan of. Originally, it was Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle. Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle aired from 1976 to 1977, so I would not have watched that first run, but I would have seen reruns. They showed repeat episodes along with episodes of Batman and something called the Batman Tarzan Adventure Hour in 1977 and 78. There was a show called Tarzan and the Super 7 from 1978 to 1980. I don't know what that show was, but I did know the Tarzan Lone Ranger Adventure Hour from 1980 to 1981, which I did watch. That's how I think I know the Filmation Tarzan. And there was the even grander Tarzan Lone Ranger Zorro Adventure Hour from 1981 to 1982. That show specifically, I know for a fact I watched religiously in 1981 and 1982. There was a TV movie called Tarzan in Manhattan that was made in 1989. I've never seen this. An actor named Joe Lara played Tarzan in that. There was also a live-action TV show called Tarzan, The Epic Adventures, with the same guy playing Tarzan, that came around in 1996. I never watched that one either. Disney had an animated TV show based on their animated movie. Their animated TV show was called The Legend of Tarzan. It was on from 2001 to 2003. I didn't watch that one either. I wasn't up my alley. There was a show in 2003 that I didn't know about. It was called Tarzan. I think it was on the WB, which is a network I did not watch in 2003 for whatever reason. I didn't even have cable. I don't think I had cable in 2003. But Tarzan was the name of the show. Travis Fimmel played Tarzan, and I'm a pretty big fan of Travis Fimmel. If you're not sure who Travis Fimmel is, he's really well known for the TV show Vikings. He played the character Ragnar Lothbrok on Vikings. He also was in the poorly received Warcraft movie that I kind of liked better than most people. A big part of it might have been because Travis Fimmel was in it, but I'm a fan of the guy. He played Tarzan in 2003. I had no idea, on a live-action TV show. I looked at pictures. Travis Fimmel does not look like Travis Fimmel. Tarzan doesn't look like a Viking. He looks very different. I probably would have never known it was Travis Fimmel if I didn't see it. Didn't watch this show, but in this show, Tarzan goes to New York City. Jane is a cop in New York, and Tarzan, I guess, helps her catch bad guys in New York, but he looks like Tarzan, but he's in New York, and he's played by Travis Fimmel. Netflix has an animated series called Edgar Rice Burroughs, Tarzan and Jane. It's set in modern day where Tarzan's a 16-year-old who goes back to London to go to boarding school. He makes his way from Africa to London, goes to boarding school, meets Jane, and they solve environmental problems and stuff. I don't know. I haven't watched it. I'm just giving you the description. I read about it. As far as more multimedia, I will say that Carol Burnett used to do a great Tarzan call on her show. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson had a skit. I'm sorry. Carol Burnett did a great Tarzan call on her show, The Carol Burnett Show, comma. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. I don't know. Do people know that the Tonight Show had people before Jimmy Fallon and Jay Leno? Yeah, Johnny Carson. When I was a kid, it was really a treat if you stayed up late and watched Johnny Carson. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson had a skit in 1981 where Johnny Carson played Tarzan and America's sweetheart, Betty White, played Jane. So you can probably look that up on YouTube, that skit of Johnny Carson and Betty White as Tarzan and Jane. And believe it or not, despite all those things I named, this list is not comprehensive. I mean, there's so much more Tarzan stuff out there. There are Hindi productions, or at least a Hindi production. There's anime, Japanese animated Tarzan. There are Spanish productions of Tarzan, Italian productions of Tarzan. The list goes on. There's video games. There were Viewmaster Tarzan discs, comic books galore, coloring books, connect the dots, action figures, Mego. I call it Mego. I don't know. Do you pronounce it Mego or Mego? I call it Mego. They had some great Tarzan action figures over the years, too. As far as influences, things that influenced Tarzan and vice versa, well, the wild man figure is sort of a literary archetype. The feral human is kind of an archetype from which Tarzan is derived. One great example of that is Romulus, the founder of Rome. Romulus was raised by wolves, but he founded the greatest city in the history of mankind, at least according to Romans. So Romulus is that wild man figure way before Tarzan was around. Rudyard Kipling wrote a little story called Jungle Book. Have you heard of the Jungle Book? I'm sure you've heard of the Jungle Book. Did you know the Jungle Book did come around before Tarzan? So the story of Mowgli, man, as many things as I know how to say. I always used to kind of pronounce it Mowgli, but I know it's not Mowgli. Is it Mowgli? Like I think Mogwai, like Gremlins. Anyway, Mowgli. Mowgli. You know who I'm talking about. The kid from the Jungle Book. He was around before Tarzan, widely cited as a major influence on Tarzan, probably almost a one-to-one direct influence on Edgar Rice Burroughs' creation of Tarzan. There's another potential influence on the creation of Tarzan, and you'll see why I say potential after I read the whole paragraph to you. But there's a journalist named Thomas Llewellyn Jones. In 1959, he wrote an article for Man's Adventure magazine. This article was about a real-world person who was the 14th Earl of Streatham, an English earl. His name was William Charles Milden, and according to Thomas Llewellyn Jones, William Charles Milden spent 15 years living in the wilds of Africa between 1868 and 1883. Apparently, Milden's ship was wrecked after a 3-day storm, and the young lad survived by clinging to a piece of driftwood that washed him up on shore somewhere in equatorial Africa. There were some official insurance documents provided by Llewellyn that verified the ship's destruction in 1868. Milden claimed to have been befriended by a group of benevolent apes who offered him food and shelter. The boy then took a place of pride in the ape family by fashioning weapons and building fires. Eventually, he left the apes as a teenager and lived with a tribe of natives. That is the story that Thomas Llewellyn Jones wrote about in 1959 as a totally true story that predates the legend of Tarzan by about 20 years. Of course, nobody knows if it's true or not. A lot of people pretty much think that this Thomas Llewellyn Jones guy just made the whole thing up, that it was all just totally fake. Man's Adventure magazine did run true stories, but nobody seems to be able to find any evidence to back up this story that Thomas Llewellyn Jones told in 1959. So it's very possible that there's no such person as William Charles Milden, but it was a great, we were all punked in 1959 by Thomas Llewellyn Jones. When it comes to characters influenced by Tarzan, well, I think that's a little bit easier. Jerry Siegel, one of the creators of Superman, said that Tarzan, along with John Carter, who is another character created by Edgar Rice Burroughs, but he says Tarzan and John Carter were early inspiration for his creation of Superman. There is the pulp character, comic book character, movie character, Jungle Jim. I think Jungle Jim definitely wouldn't exist if not for the success of Tarzan. There's Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, not only a star of punk rock songs, but Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, was also a comic book character, a movie character, sort of a gender-swapped version of Tarzan, Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. Khazar is a character in Marvel Comics. Khazar, pretty much a one-to-one duplicate of Tarzan with just a name change. Fans of poor animation from the poorly drawn animation of the 60s with great theme songs. Fans of those kind of cartoons are going to be very familiar with George of the Jungle. You know, George of the Jungle was a cartoon before it was a Brendan Fraser movie. George of the Jungle is nothing if not a parody of Tarzan. Keeping in the jungle theme, there was like a Tim Allen movie called Jungle to Jungle that had a little bit of a Tarzan vibe to it. I think maybe there was a kid who was a jungle boy that Tim Allen adopted or something. I haven't seen the movie, but I think it's got something to do with that. Takes the kid from the wild jungle of the rainforest or something to the wild jungle of New York. And then I saw a movie as a kid that just was like way back in the back of my head. And it was a Disney live-action movie that we actually watched in school, but we watched it like on an 8mm projector. When I was in elementary school, they would still bring in this reel-to-reel 8mm projector, or maybe it was 16mm. I don't know, but they'd bring this thing in. They'd put up like a sheet to work as a movie screen. They would actually project it in the cafeteria, and all the elementary school would get to watch a movie once a year. And they brought in this movie where there was this jungle man who's basically Tarzan, and he's brought to America by a track and field coach and a sports agent, and they have him compete like in the Olympics or something. And it was a movie that I just like could barely, what was this? So I finally looked it up. It's got Tim Conway in it. So that right away, Tim Conway, that's an automatic thumbs up. It's called The World's Greatest Athlete. It was made in 1973, so it would have been at least 10 years old when I watched it. But, you know, I'm going to have to poke around and see if Disney Plus has The World's Greatest Athlete on it. It's kind of funny. You bring Tarzan, put him in the Olympics. Another literary influence of Tarzan is something known as the Wold-Newton family, W-O-L-D. Now, the Wold-Newton family is a literary concept derived from a form of crossover fiction developed by this science fiction writer, this guy named Philip Jose Farmer. He's created this explanation for a lot of these fictional characters based on a real-life event. So in real life, there actually was this meteorite that's known as the Wold Cottage meteorite. It fell near a place called Wold-Newton in Yorkshire, England. It fell in 1795. And then, according to this writer, Philip Jose Farmer, according to his stories, this meteorite caused genetic mutations in the occupants of two carriages that happened to go by when this happened because of ionization. So, basically, his explanation was that this meteorite mutated to make these exceptional individuals come out of this family line from the descendants of these people that were in these carriages, that they were all exceptional individuals. Tarzan, of course, was one of them. Doc Savage, another pulp hero, was another one. Sherlock Holmes, supposed to be part of this Wold-Newton family. Solomon Kane, the Scarlet Pimpernel, somebody you heard me talking about with the recent Zorro episode. Professor Moriarty, Phileas Fogg from Around the World in 80 Days, the Time Traveler from H.G. Wells' Time Machine, Alan Quatermain, Fu Manchu, The Shadow, Sam Spade, Nero Wolfe, Philip Marlowe, James Bond, and Arsène Lupin. This whole idea of the Wold-Newton family all started because Philip Jose Farmer wanted to write a Tarzan story that tried to make it seem like a gritty, real-world reboot. He basically was trying to do what Nolan did with Batman, only he wanted to do it with Tarzan, and that turned into this whole Wold-Newton family. And this is a concept that was borrowed pretty heavily by Alan Moore for League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. So there you go. Not all the response to Tarzan has been positive. You got to remember the Tarzan books, the Tarzan movies, in particular, the early Tarzan movies, they employ a lot of stereotyping, extensive stereotyping that was pretty common in the times in which they were written and made. You go back and watch them now, you can kind of see like it's not necessarily going to line up with modern sensibilities. Rudyard Kipling, the guy who wrote the Jungle Book, was not flattered by Tarzan. Here's what Rudyard Kipling had to say, and this is a quote. Rudyard Kipling says that Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote Tarzan of the Apes just so that he could find out how bad a book he could write and get away with it. That's how Rudyard Kipling describes Tarzan of the Apes. Back on the positive side of things, in the world of science, Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall, very famous for So Like Us, I think is how a lot of us know Jane Goodall, a very well-known primatologist, studied chimpanzees in Africa extensively. Jane Goodall has described the Tarzan series as having a major influence on her childhood, that she was familiar with the character of Tarzan and a human living with apes. And she, honestly, this is not me trying to make a joke and say this is what happened. This is Jane Goodall's own words are, she did what she did with chimpanzees. She studied them, lived with them, because growing up she loved Tarzan. So how about that? Something pretty cool came out of that. Also, Tarzan, that character's been commemorated with the scientific name of a species of chameleon. There's a chameleon called Kaluma tarzan. The species name, the genus and species, Kaluma tarzan. It's endemic to Madagascar, named after Tarzan. I spent 3 months in Madagascar. Madagascar, I think, at least it's what I was led to believe when I was there, Madagascar has more chameleons than any other country. I was there in the jungle for 3 months, never saw a single chameleon, because they are that good at being chameleons. I mean, seriously, they camouflage themselves really well. Now, when I say I didn't see one, doesn't mean that I might not have been standing a quarter of an inch from one, but I didn't see any chameleons when I was in Madagascar. Tarzana. This is another one where I found some conflicting stories. Tarzana, California. Tarzana, neighborhood in the San Fernando Valley region of the city of Los Angeles. I've heard two stories. I've heard Tarzana is the site of a ranch that was owned by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and that Tarzana was named after Tarzan because Edgar Rice Burroughs lived there. But then I've also heard the exact opposite. I read that Edgar Rice Burroughs lived in Tarzana, and he loved Tarzana so much, he named his character Tarzan. And I found maybe an equal number of reports. Of course, they all probably go back to the same two original sources, but either Tarzana was named after Tarzan or Tarzan was named after Tarzana. Edgar Rice Burroughs lived in Tarzana. I don't know the answer to it because I wasn't around the whole time. Somebody might be able to come up with a very definitive answer as to which came first, Tarzana or Tarzan. But I do know that the two are linked and that Edgar Rice Burroughs lived in Tarzana, created the character Tarzan. So I won't argue that anymore. Recommendations. This is a little bit bigger than my usual recommendations, but there are 19 novels in the public domain. What does that mean? Well, that means you can read them for free online. I like to read public domain books courtesy of Project Gutenberg, but you just type in Tarzan of the Apes, public domain. It'll direct you to either Project Gutenberg or something equivalent where you can just sit there and download it onto your device or read it on your computer, whatever you want to do. I downloaded the PDF onto my desktop. You can read 19 Tarzan movies absolutely free because they're in the public domain. You can actually listen to episodes of the 1950s radio show. Now, I didn't see any of the 1930s, the first show, but the second radio show, I saw there were whole episodes of that you can listen to for free on YouTube. So that's something else you could do if you're really into old-timey entertainment and you're into Tarzan. I did watch an episode of the Filmation cartoon on Amazon Prime, but I did have to pay $1.99 for it. So for me, it was worth it for nostalgic reasons. I don't necessarily know that you want to pay $1.99 to watch Filmation's Tarzan, Lord of the Apes on Prime, but maybe you do. I'm just letting you know it's out there and that I'm a fan. Your mileage may vary. You may know something I don't know, a way to watch it without paying $1.99. That's on you. That's not on me. And then here's something else I found interesting. The Disney movie Tarzan and the Disney movie Tarzan 2, they are streaming, but not on Disney Plus. Tarzan and Tarzan 2 are streaming on Netflix. So if you're into the Disney thing, which I haven't been for Tarzan, though I've been into it for a lot of other stuff, you can watch Tarzan and Tarzan 2 not on Disney Plus, but on Netflix, at least in the U.S. All right, well, that's it for this episode. If you want to follow the show on Twitter, the Twitter handle is @HV Podcast. You want to give me a like on Facebook, the Facebook page is Facebook.com/Heroes and Villains Podcast. You want to send me an email, tell me what you know about Tarzan, what you think about Tarzan, correct me on Tarzana, correct me on any of my pronunciation. You can do that. You can send me an email. The email address is laundryroombruce@gmail.com. That's laundryroombruce, all one word, spelled just like you think, @gmail.com. If you're looking for stuff to listen to, check out Chubby Wizard. On Chubby Wizard, I've done a lot of weird stuff lately to kill some time. Done a lot of shows with my kids. Maybe you'll enjoy those. Go check them out. There's dad jokes. There's reviews of Dragonlance, the Dragons of Autumn Twilight. There's reviews of Mr. Boogedy with Adam Portress. There's all kinds of stuff to check out on Chubby Wizard. Hero Movie Podcast is always out there and going strong. Clone Wars 30 Questions, a cool show about the final season of Clone Wars. I do that with Adam and Sean. If you got some time to kill, you don't really have to watch Clone Wars to enjoy that show. Just go give it a listen. The book, Dragon Blinder, it's a book I've written. It's actually a collection of 3 books, Dragon in the Needles, Dragon in Gallus, and Dragon in the Darklands, all collected into one complete collection. That's ebook only, Dragon Blinder. It's available on Amazon, Amazon.com, Amazon.uk, etc. Chubby Wizard, Wrath of the Manticore, also available on Amazon. You can go check those things out. And as always, until next time, remember, heroes are super.
I wanna live in a world full of heroes, not sit here counting zeros in a cubicle downtown. I wanna look out my window, see 'em flying, and swing across the horizon as I cheer 'em on so bright.